Your grandfather pulled more fish out of the river during the Great Depression than you caught all last season combined. He did it with cotton string, a bent nail, and absolutely zero technology sitting anywhere near that muddy bank. No sonar unit glowing under a console, no fluorocarbon leader materials spooled tight on a Japanese-engineered reel worth $400. That man fed his family 3 nights a week on channel cat and bluegill because failure meant his kids went hungry. I want you to sit with that for a second, because that kind of pressure builds knowledge you cannot purchase at any tackle shop. I have spent 20 years chasing the biggest, ugliest flathead catfish swimming in American rivers with European rod pod setups and imported boilie recipes. I hold 2 state records, and I am telling you straight, the deadliest techniques I have ever used came from old men who never owned a reel. Everything I thought I knew about catching fish got quietly dismantled by guys fishing with nothing but desperation and a lifetime of watching water. Over the next few minutes, I am going to hand you 15 Depression-era fishing tricks that still outperform modern methods on any river today. Some of these will save you real money, some will put fish on the bank when your expensive gear sits dead silent all night long. At least 2 of them will permanently rewire the way you look at moving water for the rest of your fishing life. These are not cute historical footnotes or campfire stories your uncle tells after his 4th beer on a Saturday night somewhere in Kentucky. These are field-tested, river-proven techniques that kept families alive when the entire American economy was on its knees begging for mercy. I collected them over 2 decades from old-timers along the Missouri, the Ohio, the Wabash, and a dozen tributaries most maps barely bother naming. Every single one of them still works, and most of them cost absolutely nothing, which is exactly why no tackle company will ever mention them. Now let me tell you who I am, and why you should trust a word coming out of my mouth right now. My name is Marcus Vance, and I have been fishing rivers with an intensity that most people would call unhealthy for the last 20 years. I specialize in trophy catfish and carp, the kind of fish that live in heavy current and do not make mistakes very often. I pioneered European-style bank fishing setups on American water, running multi-rod pod systems with electronic bite alarms and bait chemistry that took me years to dial in properly. 2 state records for flathead catfish sit on my wall, and I earned both of them on rivers most anglers drive past without stopping. But here's the confession that costs me nothing to make and might save you a small fortune in unnecessary gear purchases this year. All of that equipment, all of that technology, all of those imported ingredients I mix in my bait lab at 3 in the morning before a session, none of it replaces the fundamental knowledge I started gathering from old rivermen who fished the Depression years as young boys and never forgot a single lesson the water taught them. A friend's grandfather on the Wabash showed me something one afternoon that made me set down a $400 reel and just stare at the river in silence for 10 minutes. He held up a hook he had carved from a thorn, and everything I believed about terminal tackle started cracking right down the middle. Trick number 1 is the thorn hook, and it is so stupidly simple that you have probably stepped on the raw materials 100 times without ever glancing down at your boot. I watched a man in his 80s sit on a folding chair beside an Indiana river and pull 3 fat channel catfish out of a current seam in under an hour. His hook was a single honey locust thorn, curved, naturally needle-sharp, and lashed to a hand line with a few wraps of wax thread. I was 15 feet away with a full rod pod, a fresh spool of 15-pound fluorocarbon, and a bite alarm that never made a sound that entire afternoon. During the Depression, people carved hooks from honey locust thorns, hawthorn spines, and even bent safety pins because buying a steel hook meant choosing between tackle and bread. The thorn works because it carries no metallic taste. It punctures soft mouth tissue cleanly, and it costs exactly 0 cents to make if you know which tree to walk toward. The trick is bending the thorn at the right angle so the gap mimics a standard J-hook and binding it to the line with waxed thread instead of tying a knot that would split the wood. Best targets are panfish, bullhead catfish, and small carp. But I have personally seen one hold a 5-pound channel cat long enough to land it on a hand line without any drama whatsoever. Now, if you think a handmade thorn hook is the strangest weapon these men carried to the riverbank, wait until you hear where they found their bait. Trick number 2 is the free bait system that never runs dry, and it starts with something most modern anglers would not touch with a 10-foot surf rod. I forgot my bait cooler at home one night before a flathead session on a river I will not name because I still fish it every October. I was standing on the shoulder of a gravel road cursing my own stupidity when I spotted a road-killed squirrel about half a mile from the water. An old catfisherman once told me that the best bait in the world is the one the river already knows how to smell, and dead protein is dead protein whether it comes from a bait shop freezer or a county road ditch. I cut that squirrel into strips, threaded them onto a circle hook, and by midnight I had a 22-pound flathead lying on my unhooking mat, staring up at me like I owed it an apology. Depression-era families used chicken guts, spoiled cheese, meat scraps, and roadkill as their primary bait. And they also buried fish carcasses in shallow dirt for 2 or 3 days to create what they called ripened bait, which is just a polite way of saying partially rotted protein with a scent plume that could reach a catfish 3 pools downstream. The real genius was their rotation system. They always had something decomposing at different stages, so they never showed up to the river empty-handed, and they never spent a single dime doing it. Trick number 3 is the one that almost made me walk away from the old man who told me about it, because I genuinely believed he was joking. Fishing with a bar of soap, that is what he said. And he said it with a straight face while baiting a treble hook with a cube of ivory he had just cut with a pocket knife right there on the bank of the Cumberland River in Tennessee. I tried it that same afternoon because I figured the worst outcome was a funny story. And 40 minutes later, I was holding a 12-pound channel cat with a tooth mark punched clean through a chunk of white soap still sitting on my hook. During the Depression, especially across the South, lye soap made from rendered animal fat was one of the most reliable catfish baits anyone had ever found. The tallow dissolves slowly in current, throwing a greasy scent trail downstream that channel cats follow like a road map drawn in bacon grease. Modern soaps mostly use synthetic detergents now, but ivory still contains enough animal-derived fat to work, and Zote, that big pink Mexican laundry bar you can buy at Walmart for $2, is even better because it is loaded with tallow and coconut oil. You cut it into half-inch cubes, press it onto a treble hook, cast it into slow to moderate current, and wait about 20 minutes before the first run. I have caught over 30 catfish on soap in the last 4 years, and every single time I bait up with it, I think about that old man on the Cumberland who looked at me like I was the dumbest fisherman he had ever met for not already knowing this. Now that we have covered bait that costs you nothing, let me show you how these people caught fish without even owning a reel. Trick number 4 is the limb line, and I am not exaggerating when I call it the laziest and most productive fishing method ever invented by a hungry human being standing next to moving water. I saw a system of 20 limb lines stretched along a half-mile bank on a river in Arkansas, each one tied to a live willow branch hanging over deep water. The man who owned that system was 83 years old, and he paddled a flat-bottomed John boat down the line at dawn, collecting fish like a farmer picking tomatoes off a vine. He pulled more catfish off those 20 lines in 30 minutes than I had caught in a full week using 3 rod pods and 6 rods with electronic bite alarms screaming every time a carp bumped my lead. A limb line is just a strong line tied to a flexible living branch, with a baited hook dangling 6 to 12 inches below the surface over deep water. The branch acts as a natural shock absorber. When a fish hits, it bends instead of breaking the line, and the fish tires itself out, fighting a tree. Legality depends on your state, so check your regulations before you set one. But the principle is pure engineering genius, born from people who needed protein more than they needed permission. Trick number 5 is where everything changes, because this one is not about tackle or bait. It is about seeing what the river is already telling you for free every single second of every single day. I was standing on the Ohio River with an old fisherman who had been reading that water since Eisenhower was president, and he pointed one crooked finger at a faint smooth line running through the chop about 40 yards out from the bank. He said there is a cat sitting right there, and he said it the way you might say there is a chair in the corner of your kitchen. No drama, no doubt, just a fact. I cast to that exact line, and 3 minutes later I was fighting an 18-pound flathead that had been invisible to my eyes and to the $1,000 Humminbird unit sitting in my tackle bag because I had not even bothered to turn it on yet. Depression-era fishermen read water by surface texture. A glassy strip in rough water means a deep hole beneath it, because depth absorbs the energy that creates surface chop. A visible seam where 2 currents meet marks the dinner table. Fish hold on the slow side facing the fast side, burning almost no energy while food drifts straight to their mouths like room service. Bubbles rising in one persistent spot means submerged structure or a fish actively rooting along the bottom, and either one is worth a cast. Modern sonar shows you the same information on a glowing screen, but these men decoded it live with nothing but 2 eyes and 50 years of paying attention. I want to pause here and tell you something before we move on, because trick number 6 connects directly to this idea of using what the land already offers you. On a farm along the Missouri River, I watched 3 local fishermen dig night crawlers from a patch of ground where cattle had been standing the day before, and those worms were twice the size of anything I had ever bought from a bait shop refrigerator. Cow hooves compact the soil, and cow manure draws massive worms right to the surface. Depression-era fishermen knew the best digging was always under a cow patty aged 3 to 5 days, old enough to attract worms but fresh enough that they had not dispersed yet. They also crushed green-black walnut hulls, soaked them in water, and poured that dark juice onto a patch of dirt. The tannins and juglone irritate the worm's skin and drive them to the surface within minutes, completely free and completely chemical-free. I have tried the walnut trick in Missouri clay and Kentucky limestone soil, and it worked both times like someone flipped a switch underground. I am genuinely curious whether anyone watching this has tested it in sandy ground or red Georgia clay. Drop that in the comments because I want to know if the soil type changes the speed, and I read every single response. Now trick number 7 crosses into territory that makes a $30 jar of commercial stink bait look like the most overpriced item in the entire tackle aisle. A Tennessee old-timer once handed me a sealed mason jar of homemade fermented bait, and when I cracked that lid in my truck, the smell was so violent my fishing partner opened his door at 40 miles an hour and threatened to walk home. That jar of rotten horror caught 5 catfish totaling over 60 pounds in a single night, which was more than our previous 3 sessions combined using store-bought dip bait. Trick number 7 is the Depression-era fermentation recipe. Chunks of chicken liver, cheap processed cheese, minced garlic, and a fistful of flour sealed in a glass jar and left in direct sunlight for 5 to 7 days until the whole mess turns into a bubbling amino acid bomb that catfish can smell from hundreds of yards downstream. Commercial stink baits try to copy this process, but they add preservatives to extend shelf life. And those preservatives kill the living fermentation that makes the scent plume so devastating in moving water. The homemade version is always stronger because it is still alive, still producing volatile compounds, still screaming underwater in a chemical language that channel cats and blue cats are hardwired to follow. The final secret is a few drops of anise oil stirred in right before you seal the jar. You can find it in the baking aisle at any grocery store for $3, and the anethol in that oil amplifies scent carry distance and current like a megaphone strapped to a whisper. Trick number 8 is the simplest one on this entire list, but it fundamentally changed the way I think about fighting big fish on any setup. I broke the drag on one of my reels halfway through a night session targeting flathead, and instead of packing up, I remembered a technique from a 1930s fishing journal. I wrapped the line around a smooth stick, held it in my hands, and used a wet rag for extra friction. Depression-era handline fishermen controlled fish over 20 pounds with cotton string and bare palms because they understood something most modern anglers forget. Drag is not a mechanism inside your reel. Drag is controlled friction, and you can improvise it from a forked stick, a belt loop, a wet bandana, or anything else that lets you apply and release pressure on a sliding line. Which means equipment failure never has to cost you the fish of a lifetime if you understand the principle underneath the machine. If any of this is making you rethink what you thought you knew about fishing, hit that subscribe button right now, because the second half of this list is where things get truly wild, and the next trick is connected to something you see every single time you stand beside moving water, but have never once stopped to consider what it actually means. Trick number 9 is fishing by the moon instead of by the clock, and it took me 2 years of writing down every single catch before I believed it was real. I kept a journal, date, time, moon phase, water temperature, barometric pressure, every fish landed with its weight, and the exact minute it hit. After 2 full years of entries, I spread the pages across my kitchen table one Sunday morning, and a pattern jumped off the paper like a slap. Every single one of my biggest flathead catfish, including both state records, was caught within 3 days after the new moon, not during it, but after it. Depression-era fishermen did not plan their trips around weekends, because weekends meant nothing when you were unemployed and your children needed dinner on a Tuesday night. They planned around the moon the way a farmer plans around rain, and they knew something that modern Soliner apps bury in tiny footnotes nobody reads. The peak feeding window is not the exact night of the new or full moon. It is 1 to 3 days later, when whatever gravitational shift triggers that activity is still rolling through the water column like a slow wave. They also tracked moonrise and moonset every single day because each one creates a minor feeding burst lasting 30 to 45 minutes, even in broad daylight when you would swear nothing down there is moving at all. Trick number 10 is about weather, and specifically about the one weather event that sends every sensible angler running for the truck while the fish go absolutely berserk behind their backs. I was on the Tennessee River watching a thunderhead stack up on the western horizon like a dark purple wall being built by something angry, and every other fisherman on that bank started breaking down rods and zipping up tackle bags. I stayed because an old man had once told me that the hour before a storm is worth more than a week of bluebird sunshine, and that evening I pulled my second state record flathead out of a current seam that had been dead quiet all afternoon. Depression-era fishermen could not check a barometer app on a phone, but they read the sky and the land the way you read a text message from your wife telling you dinner is ready. Birds dropping low to the water, cows folding their legs and lying down in the pasture, insects going haywire over the surface. All of those signs meant atmospheric pressure was falling fast, and fish were about to feed like it was their last meal on Earth. Modern science confirms exactly what those old-timers already knew. A rapid barometric drop in the 2 to 4 hours before a weather front arrives flips a switch inside every catfish, carp, and bass in the river. Their swim bladders feel the change, and some deep wiring tells them to eat hard right now because the high-pressure bluebird conditions rolling in behind that front will shut their appetite down for 12 to 24 hours. The window is brutally short, maybe 2 to 4 hours, but it is the single most productive period that exists in freshwater fishing, and most people spend it sitting in their truck watching rain hit the windshield. Trick number 11 sounds like something a superstitious uncle would mutter over a campfire, and I dismissed it for years until a Kentucky fisherman said one sentence that made me feel like a fool. He looked at my rod set up on a beautiful shallow flat in late October and said, "Son, you are fishing summer spots in a fall river." And then he walked away without explaining because he figured any grown man holding a fishing rod should already know what that meant. It took me 3 empty sessions to swallow my pride and ask him what he was talking about, and what he told me reorganized my entire autumn strategy overnight. After the first hard frost of the season, fish do not gradually drift toward deeper water, the way I always assumed. They relocate fast, almost violently, within 3 to 5 days. Depression-era fishermen treated that first frost the way a general treats a signal flare. Everything changes right now, not next week, not when you feel like adjusting. They abandoned every shallow bank, every riffle, every flat they had been fishing all summer, and moved straight to the deepest holes on the river, sometimes 30 to 50 feet down in the big waterways. For catfish and carp, this rule still cuts with surgical precision today, and the mistake I see modern anglers make every single October is exactly the mistake I used to make, sitting on a summer spot, wondering why the river died when the fish simply packed up and left 3 days after the frost, and nobody told them to wait for the weekend. Trick number 12 is going to sound familiar if you have ever watched a European carp angler spot a kilo of boilie crumb over a swim and call it revolutionary, because American dirt farmers were doing the exact same thing with a bucket of feed corn during the Roosevelt administration. I brought European bank fishing to American rivers. That is literally my thing. And when I first learned about Depression-era grain chumming, I had to sit down and accept that I had been importing a concept at enormous cost that already existed in my own country for 70 years before any British angler ever rolled a boilie. Those old farmers took field corn or wheat or barley, dumped it in a bucket of water, and left it in the sun for 3 to 5 days until it started bubbling and smelling like sour mash from a backyard still. Then they scattered handfuls of that fermented grain into their chosen spot every evening for several days before they ever put a hook in the water. The fermentation produces ethanol and free amino acids. the exact same attractant compounds that the entire modern European bait industry packages into boilies, method mixes, stick mixes, and spod mixes at $20 per kilogram. A 50-pound bag of feed corn from Tractor Supply costs $4 and will pre-bait a swim for a month, and the biochemistry is identical because you cannot patent what yeast and water do to a kernel of corn. I spent years ordering imported European bait mixes and paying international shipping, and the most effective pre-baiting I have ever done for river carp used corn I bought at a farm co-op for less than the price of a gas station coffee. Every time I dump a bucket of fermented grain into a swim now, I think about some Depression-era farmer doing the same thing with cracked wheat and laughing at whatever I would become. Trick number 13 might be the single biggest turn in this entire video, because it challenges something the modern fishing community treats as almost religious doctrine. I am a catch and release angler for game fish, and I will be until I die. But I had to make peace with the fact that Depression-era fishermen operated on a completely different logic. They never threw a single fish back, and their reason was not greed, but pure operational intelligence. Every drum, every gar, every sucker, every skipjack herring that hit their line became the next link in a closed protein cycle that never required a bait shop receipt. Step 1. Catch small fish on free bait, worms from the cow pasture, fermented grain, kitchen scraps that cost nothing. Step 2. Cut that small fish into fresh chunks or keep it alive on a stringer and use it as bait for the big predators, flathead catfish, blue cats, striped bass, largemouth, whatever apex swimmer ruled that particular stretch of river. The reason this system destroys store-bought bait is something I call matching the local protein. A fresh-cut skipjack herring from the same river you are fishing carries the exact scent signature of the prey species that every predator in that water is already programmed to hunt. Here is the part that genuinely rearranged my thinking. I spent years buying expensive frozen bait shipped from 3 states away, ordering vacuum-sealed shad online, paying $15 a pound for cut bait that had been dead for a week. The single most effective flathead bait I have ever used was a skipjack herring I caught with a cast net 10 minutes before I put it on a circle hook, from the same river, still bleeding, still smelling like exactly what a 50-pound flathead eats every night of its life. Free, local, and so deadly, it made every dollar I had ever spent on imported bait feel like a donation to a company that was selling me my own ignorance. Trick number 14 is connected to something you are doing wrong every time you show up at the water, and I know that because I did it wrong for 17 straight years before a humiliating evening on the Ohio River forced me to stop and listen. I used to arrive at the bank like I was setting up a construction site, truck door slamming, gravel crunching under my boots, rod pod legs scraping across rock, 3 bite alarms chirping through their startup sequence while I talked strategy with my fishing partner at full volume. Then I would sit there for an hour or two, wondering why nothing was biting and blaming the moon phase or the water temperature or some other factor that had nothing to do with the obvious problem. The obvious problem was me. I was announcing myself to every fish within 100 yards like a marching band walking into a library and wondering why everyone stopped reading. Depression-era fishermen approached the water the way a deer hunter approaches a tree stand, slow, silent, almost apologetic for existing near something they intended to catch. Sound moves through water roughly 4 times faster than through air, and heavy footsteps on a clay bank send low-frequency vibrations through the substrate that fish pick up through their lateral lines at 30 meters or more. Those old men sat in one position without moving for a full 30 minutes before they ever put bait in the water, letting the river forget that a 2-legged predator had just parked itself on the menu's doorstep. Be honest with me right now. How many of you actually sit motionless for half an hour before your first cast? Because I did not start doing it until 3 years ago, and my first hour catch rate jumped by what I estimate is 40%. So tell me in the comments whether you have tried this and what happened. This principle has a fancy name now: stealth approach, stealth fishing, and European specimen hunters pay for weekend seminars teaching it. But Depression-era Americans practiced it on instinct 80 years ago because spooking one fish meant one less meal and they could not afford that kind of stupidity. Trick number 15 is the last one, and I saved it for the end because it is not really a trick at all. It is the single operating principle that every one of the previous 14 tricks grew out of like branches from a trunk. An old fisherman on the Missouri River watched me set up on a beautiful flat bank with easy truck access and a gorgeous view of the bluffs across the water, and he said 7 words I have never forgotten. Son, you keep fishing where it is comfortable for you. Start fishing where it is comfortable for the fish. Depression-era fishermen did not pick spots based on where they could park or where the ground was flat enough for a lawn chair or where the cell signal was strong enough to scroll their phone between bites. They walked to where the fish lived, even if that meant shoving through a quarter-mile of thorns that tore their shirts, wading through mud that sucked the boots off their feet, or hiking to a river bend that no road had ever touched. They scouted water for weeks before fishing it, memorizing every submerged log, every rock ledge, every depth change the way a chess player memorizes the board before the first move. I hold 2 state records for flathead catfish, and both of those fish came from spots that required a 20-minute hike through brush so dense I had to cut my way in with a machete. There was no trail, no access road, no boot prints in the mud except mine, and that is precisely why those fish were still there, because no modern angler was willing to bleed for them. Every easy access spot on every river in America has been hammered 1,000 times over, and the true giants live where the comfortable fisherman refuses to walk, which is exactly where your grandfather would have gone on day 1 because he was not fishing for a photograph. He was fishing for survival. All 15 of these tricks point at the same uncomfortable truth, and it has nothing to do with hooks or bait or moon phases or any single technique I just described. Depression-era fishermen caught more fish than we do because they watched before they acted, used what the land handed them instead of buying replacements, walked to the fish instead of expecting the fish to swim to their lawn chairs, and sat with enough patience to let the river trust them. We replaced observation with a screen, adaptation with a credit card, and respect for the water with a demand that it perform on our schedule. I am guilty of every one of those substitutions, and I have the receipts to prove it. Literal receipts. Thousands of dollars in tackle and imported bait and electronic gadgets that never once outfished a man with a cane pole and 40 years of paying attention to current seams. The fish have not changed in 80 years, and the rivers have not changed in 80 years. We changed, and I am not sure we changed in the direction we like to pretend we did. Every one of these 15 tricks is a reminder to come back to the foundation, to put your eyes on the water before you put your money on the counter, and to earn your fish the way the men who needed them most earned theirs, with silence, patience, and the willingness to walk farther than the next angler is willing to walk. This knowledge is disappearing, and it is disappearing fast, because the people who carried it are leaving us one by one, and they are taking it with them into the ground. The men and women who fished through the Depression are almost entirely gone now, and the generation that learned from them, your grandparents, my grandparents, are in their 80s and 90s with no guarantee of another winter. No book recorded most of what they knew because nobody thought to write it down. It lived in their hands and their eyes and their quiet confidence on a riverbank, and they never called themselves experts because they were just hungry people solving a hungry problem. I am asking you to do something specific this week that has nothing to do with YouTube. Find the oldest fisherman in your family or your town, sit down with that person and ask them how they fished when they were young. Ask what their mother used for bait. Ask where their father walked to find the deep holes. Ask what the river looked like before the dams went in, and write every word down or record it on your phone because next year that voice might be gone forever. Now let me leave you with one image, because I think it says everything better than any list of tricks ever could. Picture an old man sitting on a muddy bank with a cotton string tied to a willow switch and a bent pin for a hook, pulling a fat channel catfish out of the water while a young guy 10 feet away with $2,000 of Shimano and Daiwa gear stares at him with his mouth hanging open like he just witnessed a magic trick. That old man does not look up, does not explain, does not pause. He just rebaits his pin and tosses it back into the current like he has done it 10,000 times before, because he has. That old man did not need Shimano. Shimano needs to remember what that old man knew.